Good Monday morning, well, Tuesday morning, excuse me, of midterm week. Today is October 18th, and I want to respond to the couple of discussion boards that have been going on. The first one I want to respond to is the one that was about Marianne Moore, Edna St. Vincent Millay, and Amy Lowell. I'm going to be honest with you, like I always am. I wasn't real impressed with that discussion board, and I kind of anticipated that might be the case, and that's why I put those podcasts out there. I wish I'd put them out there before the discussion board was due, so that's my fault. I realize poetry can be difficult, and I guess I was expecting a little more nonetheless. I think sometimes when students are assigned poetry to read, they think they have a lot less work to do somehow, and I think Brett might have noted in one of these discussion boards that, even though it is a more concise form, traditionally, it doesn't make it any less difficult. And certainly, let's begin with Marianne Moore. Reading Marianne Moore doesn't make it any less difficult. I'm glad that, as Susie noted, there's the use of various rhythmic devices like caesura and end stop lines and enjambment. And then add to Marianne Moore her use of syllabics. Each line must have so many syllables. It's a little bit different than a regular meter, just like a choice of syllables, and it doesn't really matter about the rhythm. It just matters that you have that number of syllables per line, and that can result in a very strange kind of format and different kind of line breaks. It was perfectly fine that Sue honed in on the "I too dislike it" line in the beginning of poetry, and everybody sort of chimed in on that. And that's fine, and I respect that, and that's okay. But, this literature class hoping to help you appreciate it even more, even if you don't like it anymore. And actually, in that poem, I would have liked to have seen more discussion. Everybody seemed to sort of look at that line. I did like how Kathy Pitt did try to get a little deeper into it. And as a matter of fact, you should reread Kathy's thread that she started, because she does talk about the idea about obscurity and sincerity. And I do think there's a little something in that poem. Part of the meaning is that there's poetry in all these everyday things that we enjoy, and that sometimes poets purposely obscure, and when they do that, they're not really being genuine and sincere, and there's a reason to dislike that kind of poetry. And I think Marianne Moore strived for a more sincere, sort of genuine approach. And so I liked Kathy's analysis of that. And with the Marianne Moore poems, and with modernist elements of modernism anyway, contradictions are often a big part of it. And so you see contradictions in that poem, and especially in What Are Years? In the other discussion board, it was just the open forum, Trisha Bell had mentioned she really likes that poem, and she mentioned one of the lines she likes about the bird standing straight up and singing for all he's worth, despite the fact that he's locked in a cage. And yeah, that poem has a lot of contradictions in it. Just going to read it because I didn't read that one to you. What are years? What is our innocence? What is our guilt? All are naked, none is safe. And whence is courage, the unanswered question, the resolute doubt, dumbly calling, deafly listening, that in misfortune, even death, encourages others, and in its defeat stirs the soul to be strong? He sees deep and is glad who accedes to mortality, and in his imprisonment rises upon himself as the sea in a chasm, struggling to be free and able to be, in its surrendering finds its continuing. So he who strongly feels behaves. The very bird, grown taller as he sings, steals his form straight up. Though he is captive, his mighty singing says, satisfaction is a lowly thing, how pure a thing is joy. This is mortality, this is eternity. So, mortality, eternity, innocent, guilty. Let's see, surrendering and continuing. There are so many contradictions in that poem, and it really is the cool idea that the bird, even though it's trapped, sings, and how wonderful a thing joy is. It's kind of a contemplation on our own mortality. It's amazing that we do what we do and live the way we live, when we all know we're going to die, so that's a pretty deep idea. So I like Trisha's thread on that in the sort of the open form about the poetry. Um, let's see. I'm glad that you noted that Edna St. Vincent Millay has a sort of a sassy um, tone and a humorous tone, and she does take that sonnet form. Mary Hudgens mentioned how she loves the sonnet, and we saw a Frost poem design, and that's a dark sonnet, right? It's like a death scene, and the question is there, if you look up the word design, there's more than one definition, and design is like a purposeful plan. And the question is there God? And if there is a God, why would God let these ugly, dark, evil things happen? And if there is a design at all, if there is a plan, if God has a plan at all, certainly it's dark in a way. So that's a pretty depressing sonnet. That was Robert Frost. And Mary Hudgens, again, commented on that one. But the Edna St. Vincent Millay, she takes that sonnet form and she turns it on its ear. And usually sonnets are love poems, right? And in "Oh, oh, you'll be sorry for that word," the speaker says that, okay, I'll act the way you want me to act, like a shallow woman who's just happy to be domestic and a wife. And one day, when you look for me, I won't be here. I'll be gone because I'm not going to do it. But it's a humorous tone. So I was glad that you picked up on that. And Mary Hudgens does point out that she's going to leave. So you don't want to forget that part in that poem. That's where the turn is. It's like, oh, okay. Put down that book and give me your kiss instead. Okay, and I'll make myself look pretty, and I'll be a wife to pattern by, and then one day, not too far from now, when you call for me, I won't be here anymore. So that's a fun poem. Let's see, Amy Lowell, pretty easy to get at, that imagism, taking one image and use it to evoke a strong emotion. And sometimes that's all it is. I noticed in the Modernist, the open forum discussion, Joey was wondering, is the fog in Carl Sandburg's poem, does it represent something bigger? And the answer there is no. It's just a simile, or a personification, making the fog seem, well, I guess it's more of a metaphor, making the fog seem like it's a cat. And the way it moves in is like a cat who stealthily, comes in. But I will say this, a poem sometimes, and you guys are reading William Carlos Williams now, and the meaning is the object. The object is everything. No meaning but in objects is what William Carlos Williams is known for saying. And even though that may be the case, like with Amy Lowell and her imagism with the taxi, that has such a sad poem. It just evokes the sadness of leaving the person you love, and uses the taxi speeding through the night in a city to communicate that emotion. And in the same way, even though, Joey, I'll say that the fog is really just the fog in Carl Sandburg's Fog, certainly it can evoke a certain feeling. And so, if you're ever out on a very still and foggy night where the fog is moving in, you may be thinking about your mortality. You might be thinking about God and the universe and how nature, is created. And so even though that fog is the fog in that poem, it might evoke a feeling that once, that you'll want to contemplate. And lastly, mending wall. Why do good fences make good neighbors? Susie asks, and she was answered well by her classmates. And I do think the speaker in that poem is questioning, because the line I like in that poem is, something there is that doesn't love a wall, meaning that every year that darn wall's falling apart. And I believe Dylan had asked, what does this mean about, I could say it was elves, but it wasn't elves. The speaker's trying to think about, what causes this wall to fall down? And the other neighbor, and why do we keep putting this wall back up every year? Is it really necessary to have this wall between us? And the other guy, his father had told him, and he learned it well, good fences make good neighbors. And that's it. We're not going to talk about it anymore. No need to talk about it. And I don't know that the speaker would say we don't need a fence between us, but the speaker is contemplating and thinking about, do we need a fence between us? It seems that even nature doesn't want to keep the fence in place, so maybe we don't need a fence between us, and maybe good boundaries really, isn't going to be the way that we can communicate with each other and be good neighbors. Um, but we certainly see the speaker seems to question the need for the wall, and the other fellow seems to really be diehard in his belief that we need the wall between us. And those of us who've lived with neighbors, and as some of you noted, some are very good neighbors and know their boundaries automatically, and others uh, don't know their boundaries, even with fences, etc. So, and is it healthy to have those boundaries? Was there a time when we didn't have those boundaries? I don't know, but it's fun to contemplate. So that's like sort of an overview for your last two discussion boards on poetry. And I will say this: I hope that the William Carlos Williams discussion board, which just opened yesterday, and even if you posted to it, I hope that you'll take a little more time, be a little more thoughtful, add a little more analysis, and pull out specifics from the poem, and don't just focus on the first couple of lines on it. Think about the whole poem, and remember, don't repeat. Some of you are repeating. If you've got less than full credit, it's because you're just writing things that people have already written, and that's no fun. It's like being in a room and someone makes a point, and then the next person says, hey, that's a good point, and then the next person makes the same point again. I mean, that would be ridiculous. So remember, the discussion board is supposed to be sort of like, we're sitting in a classroom having a discussion. It's virtual, it is artificial in a way, but try to keep that in mind and remember not to repeat ideas. So that's all I think I have for today. Have a great week.